One of the challenges of being God's people is recognizing abundance in the world, abundance in our lives. Particularly when we live in a culture that always tells us that the only kind of abundance there is more. More. Whatever you have is not enough. If you got just a little bit, you need more. If you've got a medium amount, you need more. If you've got all of the blocks, you still need more. So you need to plunder somebody else's blocks so you can have them, because you don't have enough. There's never enough. That's capitalism. It's not Christian, but it's capitalism. There's always someone who needs something more, and that's where excess comes in. That's where we've lost sight of the idea of abundance, because you see, right now I'm breathing the air. I've had enough to eat today, probably more than I should have. I've had 4 cups of coffee. It's always a good thing to have delicious coffee. It was delicious coffee, actually. Just finished the delicious coffee that Dan and Janet gave us at Christmas time, and we ground it. It was delicious. And so, yes, I had 4 cups this morning. But I'm not wired anymore, unfortunately. That's, when you get to 4 cups, it doesn't wire you. When you're drinking 4 cups a day, you need to get to 8 to then be really wired. So the good news is 4 is just normal for me. But I have an abundance. I have a place to live. It's warm, covers my head, keeps me dry, and safe. Whatever safety is, as the illusion of safety goes in our society, I have enough. And enough is abundance. Abundance. Now, the only way we ever begin to develop abundance is to truly be thankful for what we already have, and not think that abundance really, or gratitude really, lies around the corner. It's the next fastest thing, the next biggest thing, the next highest paycheck, the next bigger church, for folks who work in ministry. It's not those things. We think that's what abundance is, but that's excess. Because if I don't have enough right now, let me just tell you, whatever I get is not going to be enough either. There's always going to be the need for something more. Now, today's story is an interesting story that could kind of seem to be about excess. Today's story, I'll read it to you, and then we'll talk about it, the difference between abundance and excess. I'll tell you that what excess really is about is me, and abundance is about us. See that difference? Excess is about me needing more than anybody else. Abundance is us. How can I consume or do whatever I do in this world in a way that doesn't just enhance me, but enhances everyone around me, that makes a better place for us to live? So Jesus has called a couple of disciples. Come and see. In the first chapter of the Gospel of John, we've had the wonderful prologue that is so rich and mystic. In the beginning was the Word was with God. And now, after having called 4 of his disciples, Jesus is headed off to a wedding. And that's where we pick up in the second chapter of the Gospel of John. So let me read this to you. 3 days later, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, was there. Jesus and his disciples had likewise been invited to the celebration. At a certain point, the wine ran out, and Jesus' mother told him, "They have no wine." Jesus replied, "Mother, what does that have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." She instructed those waiting on tables, "Do whatever he tells you." As prescribed by Jewish ceremonial washings, there were 6 stone jars, water jars, on hand, each one holding between 15 and 25 gallons. "Fill these jars with water," Jesus said, and the servers filled them to the brim. "Now," said Jesus, "draw some out and take it to the caterer." They did just as they were instructed. The caterer tasted the water, which had been turned into wine, without knowing where it had come from. The only ones who knew were those who were waiting on tables, since they had drawn the water. The caterer called the bride and groom over and remarked, "People usually serve the best wine first. Then, when the guests have been drinking for a while, a lesser vintage is served. What you've done is to keep the best wine until now." Jesus performed this first of his signs at Cana in Galilee. In this way, he revealed his glory, and the disciples believed in him. This is the gospel for this morning. Praise be to God. So, this is the first thing Jesus, he's called some disciples. He's, gone to the wilderness. He's done those kinds of things. And now he's come back with his 4 disciples. We hear that Mary, and we have to identify which Mary it is because, of course, there's a lot of Marys that follow Jesus. So this is Mary, his mother. Mary, his mother, is at this wedding, and Jesus and his disciples got invited too. It was kind of a village thing. There was no kind of idea that you would exclude anybody who was in town. We're very clear about who we invite to a wedding and who we don't, because it costs a lot of money. And so we're like, the more people that we invite to come, the more it's going to cost. So we're keeping it small. There wasn't any such idea in that first century. Hospitality was what it was all about. So if Jesus showed up with 4 extra disciples, no one would have thought that was rude. They would have thought it was rude if Jesus came and left his disciples at home. Why didn't you don't you have 4 guys that have been following you around? We can't possibly let you leave them at home. They need to be invited too. So everybody's invited. It's a sense of hospitality. And of course, the more people that come, the quicker you run through the wine. And this guy, the caterer, was probably a guy, could have been a woman, but chances are pretty good it was a guy, is like we've run out of wine. It's over. Now Mary notices they've run out of wine and doesn't want this bride and groom to be embarrassed. It's embarrassing when you don't have enough to go around. I suspect she doesn't want him to be embarrassed, and maybe she wants to push Jesus out into the spotlight a little bit. We don't know what was going on with Mary. Maybe one day we'll sit down and have a chat with Mary, and, amidst all of her busy kinds of things that she's doing, in eternity, we'll sit down and say, "Mary, we know you're busy, but hey, what were you thinking when you suggested to Jesus that he that he do something about the wine mixture?" But we don't know exactly what she was thinking. Jesus responds, "It's not my time. I don't think I should do this." Okay. So we think it's over. It's not over. It's not over at all. So Jesus talks to the people who are waiting on tables, the serving staff. And he says, "Hey, they've got 6 jars here. The 6 jars for purification." And purification was really big in first century Judaism. It was very important that you remain pure. And it was a physical purity as well as a moral purity in that first century. So that's a lot of what seemed to be what it was about. So they had these 6 jars so you have plenty of water to wash each other up. Always a good plan, have plenty of water to wash each other up. So there are 6 jars. Let's go really conservative. I've heard as much as each jar has 30 gallons of water that it holds. But we'll go conservative. They each hold 15 gallons. Let's imagine for just a moment that they each only hold 15 gallons. 6 of them. 6 times 15. I know that you came to church on Sunday morning. You weren't thinking to yourself, or whenever you're watching, you didn't think to yourself there would be math. However, 6 times 15 is 90. 6 times 25 is 150. 6 times 30 is 180. Somewhere between 90 and 180 gallons of water because they're filled to the brim. And Jesus says, "Hey, now that they're full, take a little dip of some of that to the caterer." So the caterer tastes it and says, "Man, this is the best stuff I've ever tasted. This is the best stuff I've ever tasted. This is amazing." Usually everybody does the best wine first, And then as people consume more and more wine, they don't notice how good or bad the wine is. I don't know if any of you have ever been in that position where you had a glass of wine. The first one was, oh, that's pretty good. And you have a second one. And then it's the law of diminishing returns. Eventually, you don't notice what it tastes like anymore because you're not feeling it. You're just, wow, this is wine. There you go. So, that's the caterer's reasoning. When people are paying attention to taste, you put the best stuff out. And then by the time no one even cares anymore because they've had 15, 20 glasses of wine, that's when you bring out the stuff nobody cares what it tastes like because they don't care anymore. And you've saved the very best for last. This is amazing. Now, we could say to ourselves, what is this lesson from this particular text? I can remember a sermon I preached a long time ago that Jesus was into a good party, and I do think if you look at the stories about Jesus, he is always at someone's party. He is always visiting someone's party. He's hanging out with sinners, prostitutes, people that most of us would probably not hang out with a whole lot. Jesus was most interested in those folks. If you got it all together, you probably didn't get Jesus over to your house very often. But if you didn't have it all together, Jesus wanted to hang out with you because maybe something could change. So Jesus is at this place. They've run out of wine, and he makes another 90 gallons of wine plus. Another 90 gallons of wine. Now, I don't know if you know about measures of wine. 90 gallons is a lot of wine. I don't know how many guests were at this, but a small village like at Cana of Galilee, we're talking maybe, it was a small fishing village in the first century. We're talking a couple of hundred people max. And he's got like almost a half gallon a person. That's a lot of wine, particularly if you've already been drinking wine. Now, what that says to me, what it might say to you is excess. Oh man, this is just excess. Why would you make a whole bunch of extra wine? Everybody's already had so much wine. Why would you make a little extra? Well, if Jesus made 90 gallons of wine for himself or just for the bride and groom, that would be excess. But this was all about there's plenty. And it's not just that we're going to make sure you have just enough to get by. You've got more than you imagined you would ever have. Something as ordinary as wine becomes the moment for the extraordinary. The ordinary, what we thought was water to begin with, now becomes the wine, the sweet wine that makes everything delightful for the rest of however long the wedding was going to go on. Most of our weddings are an afternoon and an evening kind of event. I don't see morning weddings anymore. I haven't seen a morning wedding in a long time. I've seen noontime weddings, but there are rules because if you have a noontime wedding, you got to feed everybody a certain amount of food. And if you do it at different times of the day, there are all these rules you got to pay attention to, supposedly. But, in the first century, we believe a wedding could go on for a long time. A celebration wasn't like 5 minutes. It wasn't like one afternoon. It was days. People had traveled a long distance to hang out with family. And when they travel a long distance to hang out with family, they stayed. And the party kind of dragged on for days. And here we got a wedding party that's going on for days, and now it's still not running out. You think you've reached the end, but you haven't. And that's what abundance is. You think you're right at that edge, and yet you have enough to get by. In this story, you have more than enough to get by. You have an abundance for everyone in the village. There's enough to go around. Now, this is the first sign, and there's a reason why it seems to be important that this is the first sign. Have you ever noticed over and over again in the stories in the gospel, and I think we're going to be talking about some of these other stories along the way, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But almost all the time when way too much appears, there's a whole big group of people there already. God wants to pour the abundance out. 90 gallons of wine minimum for one person would be excess. 90 gallons of wine for a village might be just enough, but it was in abundance. When it appeared there wasn't enough, there was more. And that's the way God works. The truth is, we have this beautiful world where there's enough to go around. There's no reason why some people should be starving and other people throwing away so much food because they bought way too much and it just went to waste. There should be no reason why that is. This world, but God doesn't fix it for us. God invites us to be a part of the solution. God invites us at St. James to be a part of the solution. That's part of the West End Food Pantry. If we think of that as just charity, rich people being nice to poor people, then we failed. But if we think about the generosity of God and the abundance that we have, I have way more than enough. In my life, I have way more than enough. Ought I not to share from that abundance to make the world a better place? Particularly at least for the minimum standards of humanity. I found it very interesting that Richard said there's always some kind of hate energy deep in our souls. And that has to be transformed and gotten so that it's not trying to escape. And the interesting thing is this video is probably somewhere between 12 and 15 years old. When we were still demonizing, he was talking about who we were demonizing at the time. Muslims were who we were demonizing at the time. We were still fresh on the edge of what happened on 9/11. And so for us, the demons were all Muslims. It's just the easiest way. We just label them all as demons. That's not the way God saw it. There were a few people who did something really evil. But as a whole, not the whole religion. I mean, do you want to take responsibility for the whole Crusades yourself? The slaughter of innocents? That was Christianity. You want that to be our responsibility? All Christians are bad? Or maybe the Inquisition. When the church started torturing people who didn't believe the right thing. Do you want that whole thing to be about us? All Christians are bad. Because we got some pretty good episodes where all Christians could be labeled that way. But I don't think all of them are. Any more than I think all Muslims are. It's probably a small percentage. Small percentage of all kinds of people, and we get in all kinds of trouble because of that. That which is in us, living from a point of scarcity, thinks there's not enough love to go around. And because there's not enough love to go around, I need to hoard as much as I possibly can. And what this metaphorical, physical reality of the wedding at Cana of Galilee says is there's always more. Particularly when it comes to something like love. There's always more. There was a time in my life when I could not imagine loving anyone as much as I loved Linda. And then we had kids. And I thought when Hannah came along, I don't know how I'm going to divide my love. There was no division. There was love now for Linda, and there was love now for Hannah. And then I said, okay, we've got one. I don't know if I'm going to have enough love for us to have any more. And then we had Joshua. And you know what? It wasn't that I loved Linda more than I loved Hannah, than I loved Joshua. It was that I loved them each different. Because every relationship is different. There's always more. You will never run out of love. You'll run out of time, but you'll never run out of love. Unless you believe it's a scarce resource that you can only afford to share with the few. I can only afford to be loving to people I like. People like me. Then I've missed the point. There's plenty of love to go around. In fact, if we read carefully between the lines, don't even have to be that careful if I'm being honest. If you read the Bible carefully and look at what it's all about, from the beginning it was an outpouring of love. It wasn't about who deserved it. Did we deserve to be created? No. But God did. Did we deserve this planet that's unique in the universe? Now, in the first century, they didn't understand that kind of thing. We do now. We are unique. We are different. It's a vast, infinite universe. Is there life somewhere else? Probably. Can God love that life too? Absolutely. Since when does it have to be limited to earthlings? Since when does it have to be limited to Christians? Since when does it have to be limited to United Methodists? Since when does it have to be limited to clergy who glow in the dark and walk on water? Since when? Since when? Since we developed a mindset that there's not enough, and I have to hoard what is mine to protect it. We developed some good rules about it, who God likes, who doesn't like, and the rules always fit us. I'm always inside the box. There's always room for me. If I'm in charge of religion, boy, anybody just like me is in. God loves those people. Anybody not like me, we'll have to see. We'll have to see. But that's not what the Bible says. It's not what love says. From the very beginning, creation itself was birthed in love. My favorite 20th century mystic, Thomas Merton is really high up there, but Pierre Teilhard de Chardin believed that the very fabric of the universe itself is love. If love is an energy, an action, not a state of being, if energy is a love, is an action, the very unfolding for the last 22 billion years has been an act of love. An act of love. Love doesn't seek to control the outcomes. Love just keeps loving. Love struggles to know what love looks like sometimes, but love is always pouring out in creative and positive ways, inviting us to include more. Now, around the world, we're entering a time when we're recognizing the limits of our excessive consumption. And we're drawing back in. That tends to, it happens, it's a pendulum. We're drawing back in and saying there's only enough for people who are like me. We're no longer demonizing Muslims, we're demonizing immigrants. The ones who are here legally and the ones who are here illegally. We're demonizing them. And it's because we live in a scarcity mindset. There's simply not enough to go around. There's not enough citizenship to go around. There's not enough jobs to go around. There's not enough food to go around, housing. That's the world. That's the world's approach. It's not the Jesus approach. Don't ever pretend it's Christian to draw that line, because it's not. It has absolutely nothing to do with Jesus. It has to do with selfishness and greed and excess and me. Nobody in our world needs to be a billionaire. Nobody. They are because of the way we run our systems. But nobody needs to be. But everybody needs food. Everybody needs health care. Everybody needs shelter, clothing, warmth. That's something we all need. A billionaire is an excess. Look at the way they travel and live. And you don't even have to be a billionaire to live in excess. Abundance is there's enough for all of us. Excess is there's only enough for a few. And those few are going to get it no matter how they get it, by any means necessary. Christianity calls us to recognize the abundance this world has to offer us and find better ways to share it. You may think, oh, James has gone to the socialist side. Well, maybe. Jesus was a socialist. Wasn't particularly practical, but he was. Jesus didn't ever call us to be practical. Jesus definitely didn't call us to be capitalists, considering capitalism is somewhere around 200 to 400 years old, depending on who you read and who says it. But believing that whoever has the most toys wins, is not Christian. The invitation of Christ is to begin to recognize our abundance. I have enough. I suspect most of you do too. What does having enough, having an abundance look like? Is there really enough on this planet to feed us all? And are there ways that we can build loving bridges so no one goes hungry? No one goes without a place to live. Who wants one? There are people in the world who would rather live rough. That's a choice that they make. And we got to figure that out too, but I don't know that there's an easy answer to that one. If we're being honest with each other, and I hope we are, I don't know that there's an easy way to figure this all out. We've lived in a system that rewards some people and punishes others for a long time. A really long time. Since before the United States. We've drawn lines because of color, religion, where you're from. We've drawn lines so that some of us could justify our excess and justify keeping others from the abundance the earth has. We're not always good at sharing. Jesus was. At the wedding of Cana of Galilee, he didn't just show up with a gallon jug of wine and try to make it go super far. Somewhere between 90 and 180 gallons of wine for a party that had been already going on and had plenty of wine already. Jesus showed us that abundance looks like providing enough so that there's enough for everyone. There's enough for everyone. And that's God's abundance. It's the story of the garden, and we've been trying to get back there for a long time in our lives. But moving forward, we have to find a way that includes, not excludes. That's what I saw when I read the text and listened for the echoes of abundance. Now Linda will share what she thinks about it.